Today I'm going to be attempting a philosopher tier list. Now I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but I've been put off because I know that my rankings are going to be controversial. I am going to ruffle some feathers. I was watching other people do philosopher tier lists and I was surprised at how all their tier lists would end up looking really similar. I am going to switch that up. What I'm going to be looking at is how much I like each philosopher based on their philosophies. How often do I think about what they had to say? How relevant and timely do I find their philosophy? And then I'm going to think about how much would I want to be this philosopher's friend? Would I want to have a dinner party with them? Would I want to hang out with them? Or would I cross to the other side of the road if I saw them on the street? Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer, but if you want to have a go at my tier list, I've got it linked in the description. So let's just jump straight into it and see what happens. I'm terrified. Now, for John Rawls, his veil of ignorance thought experiment was legendary. He asked, if you had to design a society without knowing what your race, class, gender, sex was going to be, what would that society look like? What rules would you pick for that society? Rawls thought we'd ensure basic equal liberties and only allow inequalities if they benefit the least advantage. So he promoted fairness, which is always good. And look at this cutie photo of him on Google. Every time I see this, I nearly break into tears. I think it is the cutest photo I've ever seen. I'm like about to cry just looking at that picture. Oh my god. Oh my god. I think with better branding, he could have been A tier, but he needed like a Descartes level iconic line to secure him a higher up spot. So let's put Rawls at B. I think that's fair. But speaking of Descartes, let's move on to him. I think Therefore I Am is an iconic line, and realistically, probably the extent to which most people know about him. Unfortunately, this banging line seems to have overshadowed all his other work. Now, his other work paved the way for the scientific method. So he's not literally a one-hit wonder, but he does sort of feel like that band that everybody knows for their biggest single, and like, yes, they have other music, but no one's really listening to it. I think that line is so iconic that I'm going to put him in B tier. It's like a pretty solid middle ground for someone like Descartes. Kant. Now hear me out. This is a hear me out. I don't think Kant and I would have gotten along well in real life, and that's important. That's one of my metrics. I'm considering this. Here's the thing about Immanuel Kant. He never left his hometown. His hometown. See, I'm a big traveler, so I don't really respect that. And he was, dare I say, manic about his daily routine and his duty. He followed an incredibly strict schedule every single day of his life. I mean, all of this reflects in his deontological philosophy, which is the idea that moral worth comes from duty and not consequences, with his categorical imperative basically being act only on principles that you'd want everybody to be following universally. So he undoubtedly made huge contributions to the world of philosophy, but I don't like his vibe. So sorry, Kant, you're too square for me. You're gonna have to go in the C tier. Thomas Hobbes invented the idea of the state of nature, which is huge. I mean, it was the backbone of 19th century political philosophy. The state of nature being a thought experiment of what society might look like if we didn't have any formal institutions, laws, or rules. He inspired the likes of John Locke, Rousseau, and Rawls. But in a state of nature, he thought humans would end up fighting and killing each other, which is a pretty pessimistic view of human nature. Now, it's not his fault. He was born during the Spanish Armada's threat in 1588 and was terrified of disorder and civil war. He ended up witnessing the English Civil War firsthand. So I understand why he saw humans in a negative light, but it's still not very nice. Cynicism sucks. Optimism... B tier. We'd be better off in a state of nature. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a fire name, but for me, not so fire philosophy. Unlike Hobbes, Rousseau thought that humans in a state of nature were good, peaceful, innocent, happy. To him, it was civilization which corrupted us with greed, competition, and inequality. A romantic idea, but hard for me to believe. I'd love to see for how long Rousseau would last in a Minecraft server with his friends. It never lasts more than a month. Also, just pointing out, just putting it out there, he did abandon his own 5 children to an orphanage. I'm gonna put him C tier. but he's dancing on the D tier line. They're very Diogenes the Cynic. So Diogenes the Cynic was the original troll. To set the scene, Diogenes was mooching about ancient Greece in about 330 BC, and he is considered one of the founders of cynicism. What's interesting about Diogenes is that he actually lived in a barrel. But why? Like, actually, why did he do this? Well, he rejected materialism. To him, the virtuous life was to live in accordance with nature and reject artificial social convention. Under consumption king, he would have hated Labubus and TikTok shop. Now, why the trolling? Well, for him, this was philosophy in action, and he believed that by exposing hypocrisy and pretension, he was pointing towards virtue. Apparently, he once went over to Plato's house and did a little dancey dance on Plato's rug and said, "Thus I trample on Plato's vanity." Now, you might be wondering, how do we know all this? Biographer Diogenes Laertius wrote it all down. That is to say, Diogenes the Cynic never put pen to paper himself. He was just living life the way he wanted to. He was living out his philosophy. And he did it in such an iconic way that his tales were passed down and we still talk about him today. So personally, to me, that is S-tier behavior. Unfortunately, Nietzsche has been misquoted to oblivion, and now his fan base is a bit of a mixed bag. Nietzsche diagnosed nihilism, but he didn't advise it, which is where he's often misinterpreted. Now see, I personally find his philosophy fascinating. He pushed back on Christian moral values, which when he was writing in the 1800s was the foundation of society. He questioned why we lived by these Christian moral values and what would happen if we stopped living by them. And he argued that Western culture, which was built on Christianity, was crumbling. He was also an advocate for paving your own way in life and living by your own moral code, instead of living by moral codes adopted from family, religion, politics, society, other people. Nietzsche also had an absolutely killer mustache and the best lore. His first book was basically a love letter to Wagner's music, which same, to be honest. And apparently, upon seeing a horse being whipped on the street, he ran up to it, threw his arms around it to protect it, and broke down in tears before fainting. Personally, I think this all is A-tier behavior, so let's pop him up there. Seneca, a Roman Stoic philosopher, playwright, and tutor to Nero, is a personal favorite of mine. He is such a beautiful writer, he could make a marble statue cry. The first time I read his book On the Shortness of Life, which I recommend to anybody who's interested in getting into philosophy, I was on a plane and I started bawling my eyes out in front of everybody. Now, his poetic writing style isn't for everyone. Some people like philosophy to be presented in a way that's straightforward and to the point. Whereas Seneca tells stories, he engages the reader, he puts a little bit of himself into the work. And his actual philosophy is stuff that I largely agree with and try to live my own life by. His life and work also embodies the tension between philosophy and politics. He was always trying to live by his Stoic philosophies while being inherently entangled in power by being Emperor Nero's tutor. I think this is really cool, so I'm gonna put him as S-tier. S-tier for Seneca. I know this is going to be my most controversial take. Aristotle. Aristotle covered every topic under the sun. Logic, biology, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric. But to me, reading his surviving works feels like watching paint dry. And indicative of how I put Seneca in the S tier, I like that stylistic and fun writing. My further issue with Aristotle is that I do have a strong preference for political and ethical philosophy. Now, while he did write politics and Nicomachean ethics, a lot of his famous writing is about metaphysics, talking about the soul, forms, matter, that kind of thing. I can't be doing with that personally. Personally, that is not up my alley. So I respect him deeply as a philosopher, but I don't connect with him in any way. I'm scared to do this. So for me, this is B tier. Aristotle is B tier for me. Personally. Every other philosophy ranking video I've watched, they put him in the S tier, so I know this is absolutely diabolical of me. Marcus Aurelius, put some respect on his name because his personal diary got leaked and now it's one of the most famous books in the world. Meditations shares intimate reflections on friendship, virtue, power, love. It's a delightful read and I feel like there's something for everyone in there. He was also a Roman emperor and considered one of the 5 good emperors. He was a Stoic, so like Seneca, he was constantly constantly dealing with that tension between his philosophical ideas and his political life. He ended up with a reputation for integrity and stability despite reigning through plagues and wars. So a well-regarded philosophical emperor who wrote a banging diary, journaling king, and we are all about journaling in 2025, so S tier. John Stuart Mill is our utilitarian king, and I like utilitarianism, so it's as simple as that really. Utilitarianism is a moral theory that we should try and maximize the good and try and make the most people happy, so yay! He also argued for female equality in his book The Subjection of Women, and in his book On Liberty he made a fantastic defense on individual freedom and free speech. So Mill seems so cute and wholesome, even though in practice utilitarians would sometimes make you do vile things. But that's not important right now. That does not matter. He wants people to be happy, so we're gonna put Mill in the B tier. Now, Hegel. Do his fans understand him really? Like, I want to ram my head into a wall every time I hear someone use the term dialectic in class. Now, my aversion to Hegel isn't because difficult ideas are bad, but because I find people tend to throw around his philosophies without truly understanding what he meant. I do like his theory about how the world progresses and develops through dialectics, but I just feel like he's missing a little bit of character. He's lacking that je ne sais quoi, that flourish which makes a decent philosopher into an icon. Compared to philosophers like Diogenes or Nietzsche, I feel like Hegel doesn't pop. So I think we're gonna have to put him in the C tier. Now, there's no denying Marx is hugely influential. The Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital made him the most famous critic of capitalism. He argued that capitalism exploits workers, alienates us from our labor, and is inherently unstable. And I'm sat for that. But he predicted revolutions that haven't happened yet. Capitalism has proved much more adaptable than he foresaw. And his ideas inspired revolutionary movements, some of which led to authoritarian regimes and mass suffering. Yes, his defenders say that these systems are distortions of Marx's communism, but critics of Marx argue that these outcomes are still tied to his ideas. In light of these considerations, I'm giving him C tier. Oh. Mary Wollstonecraft was one of the first feminist writers in the Western world. Need I say more? She lived in Georgian-era England, where, of course, women's rights was a topic that was not given a lot of thought. In her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, she argued that women deserve the same rational education and moral agency as men. She put forth that women are not naturally inferior to men, but they may come across that way because of their lack of education. Now, she was also the mother of the Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. I think, without a shadow of a doubt, we put her in the S tier. Now, John Locke is most famous for his ideas on natural rights, like life, liberty, and property. His work had a huge influence on things like the US Declaration of Independence. And honestly, he deserves a lot of credit for shaping modern political thought in this way. But here's my issue. His philosophy is deeply tied to religious views. There's a lot of theological assumptions, and some of his arguments only make sense if you really buy into those assumptions. So it makes sense for someone who heavily enjoys Nietzsche and his critique of religion, there's a bit of a mismatch with Locke. Important, yes, but someone I'd get coffee with, probably not. So I think we're gonna put him in the C tier. We've not got a D tier yet, let's do one of those. Martin Heidegger is undeniably one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century. His work reshaped how a lot of people thought about time, existence, and meaning. But there is a big unavoidable problem, which is his involvement with the Nazi Party. Even though some scholars do argue about how deep his affiliations with the party really was, it does cast a very long and troubling shadow over his work. So yes, Heidegger's philosophies might have been brilliant, but I think it's pretty safe to put him in the D tier. If it's not obvious from how I put Diogenes in the S tier, I love when philosophers actually live their philosophies. Hannah Arendt went through harrowing experiences. She survived the Nazis and escaped a concentration camp. And after all that, she wrote some of the sharpest political theory ever. She gave us an analysis of totalitarianism, how it forms, why humans might be susceptible to it, warning signs at the start of a new regime, and she also coined the term the banality of evil, showing that evil acts aren't just committed by evil people, but by people thoughtlessly following orders. And Arendt emphasized the need for public discourse and civic action to maintain political life. Her political theory has not stopped ringing true. So, S tier for her. Hats off to Arendt. Robert Nozick argued for a minimal state. Basically, the government should do as little as possible and people should be left to fend for their own devices. His book, Anarchy, State and Utopia, is a classic defense of libertarianism. And to be fair, it is an important counterpoint to Rawls and redistributive views of justice. That said, his vision of an ideal society is not for me. Like, the whole idea of maximum individual freedom and limited state involvement sounds nice in theory, but the second you need nicely paved roads or good public healthcare, you realize why such government involvement exists. I do like his fit though. He is fitted up in that photo, but D tier's looking kind of empty, so I'm gonna put him in there. Maybe it's a little bit undeserving, but otherwise I'm not gonna put anyone in there. Plato, Plato, Plato. Now, in a sense, Plato did such good PR for Socrates that it basically lasted 2,000 years. I really respect him for writing down the conversations of Socrates and giving us insight into the ancient Greek world, showing us their outlook on politics, relationships, love, religion. Now, the question is, were these conversations real? Did Socrates really present all of these ideas and say all of these things? Or did Plato largely construct them himself? Either way, it paints Plato in a very positive light. He did author some of his own stuff, like The Republic, where he devised what an ideal political state would look like. And he came up with ideas like the theory of forms and the immortality of the soul. Philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once said, "All philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato," which is to say, all philosophers draw from Plato's work at some point or another. Plus, his writing is actually really funny. The dialogues aren't just pure dense philosophizing, but they capture little jokes and moments of irony and shade. Like, Plato often captures Socrates making fun of some of the wealthy Athenians. So, funny, classic, and timeless, I think Plato is gonna have to be S tier. Simone de Beauvoir. Look, I like her theories. Her key line, "one is not born but rather becomes a woman in the second sex," is foundational to feminist philosophy. She analysed how women are treated as the other and how gender is something which is socially constructed, so snaps all around. But I really don't like how she hitched herself to Jean-Paul Sartre, publicly calling herself second only to Sartre. Modern scholarship has since tried to emphasize her independence and originality more than she herself did at the time. So great theories, but I'm just not a huge fan of that, so I'm gonna put Simone at B tier. If you're interested in learning about any of the philosophers that I mentioned in this video in more detail, I have videos about a lot of these philosophers on my channel, so be sure to check them out. Thank you for watching, and please don't hate me in the comments.